Hello friends, welcome to DotVVM Virtual Conference 2021. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and we have a lot of amazing stuff prepared for you. You will see some cool demos and a lot of new information about the things we have made in DotVVM last year. So stay tuned, and if you have any questions, please let us know in the chat. We are monitoring the chat on YouTube, so please send us your questions and we will answer everything you will be interested into. Okay, so how is this conference going to work? This is 2-day conference, so this is the first day. We have 4 sessions prepared for you, and tomorrow we will be starting at the same time, 1 p.m. Central Europe summertime, or it should be, we are UTC +2, so in UTC I believe it's 11 a.m. I'm not sure, but you will see it in the description of the video. So today we will be talking about the news in DotVVM 3.0, which we released in March, and in DotVVM 3.1, which we are releasing now. Now we have released the latest public preview, and after that the final version will be out. Then my colleague will tell you something about how to use AMP in combination with DotVVM, which is nice piece of technology. And then my other team member from .vvm team will tell you about the new features he has been adding in data binding. So any new improvements in data binding syntax are mostly his work. So thanks for it. And finally, I will be showing a demo of hot reload in .vvm together with the hot reload functionality that will be introduced in .NET 6, which is right now in the preview. And if you don't have time today, but you have time tomorrow, you can join other sessions. Tomorrow I will be showing how to use Fluent UI web components in .vvm. Then you will see sessions from our .vvm developer advocates. One of them will be talking about ML.NET and how to use it in .vvm, and the other one will be talking about setting up CI/CD pipelines in Amazon Cloud. So it's also a very interesting topic. And finally, the second day will be wrapped up by a short session where I will share what we are preparing for .vvm 4.0 and what you can look forward to. So let's jump right into the first session. So for those of you who are new to .vvm, who have never written an app in .vvm, or who are hearing about .vvm for the first time, I will just in a few minutes I will just share what's it all about. So .vvm is an open source framework that you can use for 2 purposes. One is you can build new applications for web using a model view model approach, which is a very interesting pattern, and it's useful in a lot of situations. So if you like MVVM, you have experience from WPF or XAML in general, then probably you will find that .vvm is very familiar to you. And the second use case is if you have old applications written in ASP.NET Web Forms, then you can use .vvm to continuously migrate it to the latest version of .NET 5. .vvm allows you to get rid of web forms slowly, not in one big update, but incrementally, page by page. And after you get rid of all web forms pages, your application will be able to run on the latest .NET, .NET 5, .NET 6, .NET Core, whatever. So as I said, .vvm is an open source framework. You can see the source code on GitHub. It's using model view model design pattern, which is great in business applications. So if you are building various admin dashboards or various information systems, anything like that, where you have a lot of grids, a lot of forms, the users are entering data in these applications, then you will probably find MVVM approach very, very good, and it helps you to make your application be testable, which is also a nice added value. And .vvm takes care of a lot of things for you, which makes you more efficient. You don't need to build an API on the server and then write some client-side code that will just consume the API and call the functions, and probably you would, in other technologies, you need to generate some clients for the API using Swagger or something like that. In .vvm, this is all taken care of, so you can naturally access the data from the database or from any other data source on the server in C# code, and then .vvm makes this data available to the application on the client side. So there is basically some kind of transparent data transfer channel, which you don't need to do anything about it. It's just there. And we want the framework to help you be productive and to be compatible even with old applications, old technologies. So that's why .vvm supports the newest versions of ASP.NET Core. So you can be on the edge, you can use the new cool stuff, as well as old ASP.NET. If you are still using .NET Framework 4.5.1, .vvm will still work there. And we have extensions for Visual Studio, so you will also have IntelliSense, you will also have all kind of comfort you are used from other .NET based technologies, so that's what .vvm can offer to you. So if you want to build new web apps, it's very easy. You don't need to write much JavaScript. In many applications, you want to write a single line of JavaScript. You will just use HTML and C#. Of course, if you want to extend the framework or build your own interactive components, then the knowledge of JavaScript is very useful. So I'm not discouraging you from learning JavaScript, but if you don't know it right now, it doesn't matter. You can still start in .vvm, and if you learn it occasionally, you will be even more productive. You will be able to do more cool things. Basically, every page in .vvm consists of two files. First is the .html file, which is our extension to HTML syntax, where you can use .vvm controls and data bindings and things like that. And C# class, which is your view model. The view model is responsible for responding to events from the user. So whenever the user clicks a button, some function in the view model will be called. And also it's here for representing the state of the page. So if you have a text box control in the page, you will have a property which is bound to this text box. So if you save your view model for later and then restore it, the page should be in the exact same state. And .vvm comes with a lot of built-in components like grid view for rendering tables with data. There is repeater for rendering collections. There is file upload, so you just use a component and everything is taken care of. You don't need to write your own APIs that will parse those multi-part form data, crazy requests which are difficult to work with. So that's already taken care of. So let's see how an application in .vvm looks like. If you know .vvm, you probably have seen this application. It's a very simple example of what you can do in .vvm. So let me run it first. And it's a very simple CRUD application that is connected to a SQLite database. So you can see there is a table. This is the grid view control, which is part of .vvm. And it supports paging, it supports ordering, so I can sort columns and things like that. And this is a natural feature of the grid view, so you don't need to write much code to do things like that. And there is also an edit form, so I can just edit details, I can add items to my order, so I can customize whatever I want. I am changing the values here. You can see the price gets recalculated automatically. Yeah, so even when I remove some items, that's it. And basically that's it. It's a very simple demo. So let's look how it's created. So basically I have this file called master page, and it's basically the template for the entire application. So you have the beginning of the HTML, the head section and things like that, which are common, shared for the entire application. And here in this master page, there is content placeholder control, which means the content of the concrete page goes here. That's it. I need to include some scripts, so I have a control which will include a script and styles needed by the application for me. So there is also a resource system which can track of dependencies of all those CSS files and things like that. And this is the page with the grid view. So you can see there is the header, the heading, which is very simple. Then we have a route link for creating new order. So this is also a .vvm component that just sends the user to another route in the application, in this case the order detail route. And this is the grid view control. So you have a grid view and you just need to define all the columns. So I have the column for ID, which you can say set the header text and the value which it is bound to. And by the way, this is bound to properties in the view model. So in the view model, I need to have a collection of the records. And so this is created date. You can use your own template. So I want to make a link to the contact email. So that's how I'm rendering the link for the email address, and items, price, and the edit button, which is also just a link to other page. It's going to the order detail page, and it sets the URL parameter named ID to the ID of my record. And there we have a data pager control, which is responsible for pagination. So this switcher of the pages, it's the .vvm data pager control. Yeah, so we have these building blocks where you can, which you can use just to compose the application. So this file is the .html extension. So this is HTML with .vvm components and with the data bindings. And if you look in the view model, and I can do it by pressing F7, and .vvm extension will navigate me to the view model of the page. So you can see it's a C# class. And basically I'm using dependency injection because it's not a good idea to write logic inside the view models, but you can inject your services to the view model in the constructor. So I'm requesting an order service, and this property of type grid view dataset, this is the representation of the collection I'm rendering in the grid view. Basically it's a list which supports sorting and paging. So you can see I'm creating a new grid view dataset of these records, and I'm setting paging options. So I can set page size to 10, and I'm setting default sorting. In the grid view, you can click on the column headers and change the sorting criteria, but I can set this default one. So by default, I'm ordering by created date and descending. So the most recent orders will be on the top. And here I'm overriding the view model method pre-render, which is used typically to load data from the database. So if the dataset needs to be refreshed, because you don't need to reload the data every time, just sometimes when they are not present in the dataset, then I'm just using my order service to provide me iQueryable of these records. And when I have the iQueryable, I can just say dataset.load from queryable, and it will apply the sorting and paging instructions from the dataset on top of this iQueryable and evaluate the expression. So if you are using Entity Framework or, I don't know, Cosmos DB, MongoDB, any database provider which supports Link, it's extremely easy to use because you will have the iQueryable and you can just say load from queryable. If you are loading data from other data source which doesn't support iQueryable, it's not a problem. The dataset also can be filled manually. There is the items collection on the dataset, so you can put the data right in the items collection, and you can read the paging options and sorting options to determine using which column you should order or page. Yeah, so this is the page with grid view. Basically, getting the data inside of the dataset is just one line of code. And here, if you are interested how to get the iQueryable, I'm in the order service and I'm using Entity Framework. So I'm using AppDB context, which is my representation of the tables in the database. And I'm just using dbcontext.orders, and I'm selecting this order list DTO, which is my model object which I'm passing to the user interface. I'm not passing directly the order class because it will have much more columns that I actually need. So I'm just projecting using select. I'm projecting the table to my own objects that are tailored for the concrete page, for the order list page. Yeah, it's safer than passing the entire entity because you might expose data which you actually don't want to share with anyone. Okay, so this is the get orders query. Let's look quickly on the other form. This is the order detail form. So let's open it. So you can see the created date. You can enter or change the email address. And here is a collection of items. You can add and remove items from the collection. And as you can see, I have the form element. I'm using Bootstrap, so this is a little bit long because Bootstrap needs this div, label, and inner div to create a form group. So I'm just printing out the created date. I'm using text box control for entering the email address. So you just use dot text box and bind to the text variable, text property, and that's it. And for the order items, I have a collection of items in my order. So there is the order items collection. And for each member of the collection, I'm rendering this form group, which contains the selector for choosing the product. This is the combo box. So you can see it's this. And I'm telling it, okay, bind to a products collection I have in my viewmodel root. And this is the selected value. So once the user selects a product, its ID will be written to product ID property of my order item. And if I change the selection, it means that the price has potentially changed. So I'm calling the recalculate price function whenever the value is changed. The same applies to quantity. If the user changes the quantity, I'm also recalculating the price. And there is a button to removing the current row. So if you don't want it, you can just remove it. And also under the repeater, there is add order item, which also adds an item to the order. Total price is just a read-only field. So this is once it's recalculated, it will be printed out here. Validation summary, which aggregates all validation errors from the form and display it on one place. And those two buttons, save changes and go back to the order list. Yeah, so from these building blocks, you can compose the user interface. And in this view model, I have a few properties. First is edited order DTO, order detail DTO. And it's a special object. It's not an entity from Entity Framework. It's just my own object, my own class, which is designed to exactly fit the user interface of the page. So I have ID, created date, contact email, and here is the collection of order items, which is a list. I'm not using paging and sorting here, so I don't need grid view dataset. I can use just list. And here in this detail, you can see there is product ID and quantity. I'm using validation attributes because .vvm supports that. So if you need to validate anything, you can just apply these standard .NET validation attributes to your classes. If there is some complex validation logic, for example, that the order must have at least one item, then you can implement iValidateTable object and implement your own validation logic. .vvm will validate this object for you before any action is taken. By default, all requests are validated. So this is part of my view model. So the view model class contains a property with this data transfer object, which is been used in the user interface to bind values into. And then when I get back, in this order detail view model, we have the edited order ID, which loads its value from the route URL. So if you look, I have the order/11. So this is the order ID. So that it will be populated automatically into this property by .vvm. You don't need to do anything else. And I'm calculating just a helper property. If it's new, it means that the edited order is 0. Otherwise, it's not new because I am showing or hiding some parts of the user interface. I'm using basically the same page to insert data and to update data. Yeah, of course, if the process is fundamentally different, you will have two different pages, but for me it's almost the same. The only difference is that I probably don't display some order ID or something like that. There should be some visible property. I'm not sure where it's... Yeah, here, the created date. Of course, if I'm creating a new item, that means that it doesn't have the created date assigned yet. So if the record is not new, then I am just showing this form group. Otherwise, it won't be there. So here I'm editing, so there is created date. If I change this to 0, you will see that the created date is not here because the visible evaluates to false. Yeah. So that's it. And then in the pre-render on the first page request, which is important, that's how you determine if it's the first request or if it's just a button click on some element in the page. So if it's the first request, if it's a not new order, I will load it from the database. If it's new, I will just initialize the empty order detail DTO class. And add order item, remove order items, these are handlers for these buttons. So I can just, this is just adding items into the collection. Yeah, so it will just use the edited order DTO order items add, and I'm adding new items and also recalculating price. Yeah. And I can see it's twice here for some reason, so I can remove this safely. Okay, so and calling the recalculate price method. Remove is the same, the only difference is that it removes the item from the collection. And recalculate price, it calls also my order service. I'm used to not have any business logic here, just delegating all the calculations, all the data loading and saving to my order service. So the view model just tells the UI what should be done and asks the business layer of the application to do the actual action. Yeah. And save changes, it will just save the order detail. I'm passing the DTO to my business layer, to my order service, which will take care of it somehow. It's not the concern of the view model, it's concern of the order service. If you go inside, you can see I'm loading the orders from the database. If it's not present, I will create it. I'm clearing the order items and creating new ones. I always wipe out everything which was assigned and creating the new stuff because it's just a demo. I don't need to do any complicated comparisons. Also, I'm recalculating price here because since the view model is sent to the browser in a JSON serialized form, anyone could just change the total price in DevTools, so always recalculate these things before storing them in the database. Yeah, you will be sending the total price to the user so the user can see the price, but if the user sends you the total price, don't trust the value, just recalculate it on your own. It's the same as if you were building a REST API. Also, you wouldn't let the client to tell you the price for the order the user is actually making. Yeah, so this is very important for the security reasons. Yeah. And here is an algorithm to recalculate the price. Okay, so that's a very short introduction in how .vvm applications look like. You have two parts. You have the view, which is HTML with some special syntax flavors like .vvm components and data binding, and you have view model, which takes care of the state of the page. So anything the user can change in the page will be represented in using view model properties, and it also takes action when user does something. So for example, if the user clicks a button, the view model the function in the view model will be called. Okay, so if you use .vvm to build new web apps, it just fits the ASP.NET ecosystem. You could see in the demo that I was using validation attributes and things you know from other .NET based technologies. Whenever there is something useful in .NET, we in the .vvm team try to use it instead of implementing our own versions, because of course it's better to use standard things. It's using, for example, the authentication and authorization. So if you use any kind of authentication which works with ASP.NET Core, it will also work in .vvm, because .vvm only can tell you, okay, I need this page to be accessible only to signed in users, but .vvm doesn't care about how the user actually signed in. So this is the concern of ASP.NET Core or old ASP.NET. Yeah, so .vvm tries to fit in the ASP.NET ecosystem, so it will play nice also with other frameworks in the same application. If you want to use .vvm to modernize old web apps, the scenario looks like this. If you have a very old web applications that are on old versions of .NET, like 4.5 or something like even older, then it's probably written in very old versions of ASP.NET MVC or in web forms. If you want to upgrade the application to .NET Core, you need to rewrite a lot of things, especially the pages, because the web forms engine is not supported on .NET Core and .NET 5, and also the old versions of MVC with the ASPX views, these are also not supported. So you need to get rid of these, and ideally, in ideal case, keep the rest of the application as is, because the application will contain a lot of business logic and things that are already implemented that are working, so why rewrite all of them? And with .vvm, because it supports both old and new .NET, you can install .vvm in this very old application. It needs to be upgraded just to .NET 4.5.1. This is the lowest version .vvm supports, but typically it's not a big problem, because 4.5.1 is a very old release. I think it's more than 10 years or something like that. So it should be possible. And then, after you have .vvm installed in your application, you can just start replacing pages, but incrementally, not all at once. So you can just select any SPX page and write a .vvm page that does the same things. And because the view models are written in C#, you can call the same functions that the web forms pages was calling. So you can use the same business logic, you can use the same other classes in your applications. It will just fit in. And after the .vvm page does exactly the same thing, or it can do it even better than the old ASPX page, then you can get rid of this ASPX page. And if you do this for all ASPX pages and ASCX controls and all web forms artifacts, then you will end up with applications still running on all .NET, but it will be using only things that are part of .NET Standard or things that are in .vvm. And both these things are supported on the newest .NET. So then you will be able to switch the application to the latest version of .NET, because .vvm will still work there. The syntax of pages and the view model is unchanged, it's the same. And you won't have any web forms or old MVC dependencies in your project. So it's a long-term process. It can take weeks, it can take even months, but still it's possible. And because it's incremental, you are not working on a big pile of changes and then there is the day big release. No, nothing like that. You are still working in the same application. It will still work. It will coexist together, so you can deploy at any time. So if the users report a bug, you will fix the bug and redeploy the application. And if you use the same styles for old and new pages, then the users might not even notice that both pages are in different technologies. Yeah. So the process is like this. You will install .vvm in the web forms app. We have a helper menu in Visual Studio. So if you right click on your web forms project, there is an option to add .vvm, which is added by our Visual Studio extension, .vvm extension for Visual Studio. So just right click your web forms project and select add .vvm. It should work. If it's not working, please let us know. We will be happy to fix it. And because there is a lot of different configurations of old ASP.NET projects, and there can be a lot of assembly references that can be incompatible with .vvm. So that's what can go wrong. But still try it and let us know if there are any problems. Then you will create a master page with the same CSS styles. So you can create the .vvm master page, which will look exactly the same as the web forms one. That's why the users won't notice that some pages are in .vvm and some in ASP, still in old ASP.NET. And then you can start replacing the pages one by one. Yeah, so you can do one page a day, one page a week. It depends on how much time you have. and after few weeks or months you will get rid of all web forms pages. During the process you can deploy your application at any time, so this doesn't mean that you won't be able to release the application until the migration is done. And if all of the web forms is gone, then you can just change your CS profile to the new SDK and to run on .NET Core or .NET 5. So that's how the process looks like. If you are interested, go to our YouTube channel. We have videos dedicated to this experience. So if you are interested in this scenario, just follow us on YouTube and you will find it's one of the most recent videos we have made about this topic. Okay, so if you want to start, go to .vvm.com and there is a big green button, download .vvm extension, and if you install the extension and choose File, New Project, you will see a template for .vvm web application. So it's just a few clicks and you can play with .vvm. Okay, so let's look what's new in .vvm 3.0 and in .vvm 3.1. And basically for .vvm 3.0, which we released 2 months ago, the main topic of this release was to allow doing more things on the client side. Yeah, so because every click on button, if you are using the classic command binding, means that .vvm will take the view model, send it to the server, the function is executed, and then the changes made to the view model are sent back to the browser. If you want to be able to do some things offline, if you want to do some things, some trivial updates to the view model without communicating to the server, this .vvm 3.0 and 3.1 contains many things that will help you with. There is also integration with JavaScript using the JS directive. So you will show a demo you will see a demo for it. There is new syntax extensions in data binding. So if you want to write any code in the data binding expression, it's more powerful than in the previous version. So if you are interested, wait for the next session, because my colleague will be talking about his work on the data bindings. We have also done a lot of improvements on the client side. If you write JavaScripts which interact with .vvm view model in the page, now you will have, I would say, better safety. You won't be able to break the view model, hopefully, into some very weird state when things start, when things stop work. And we have npm package with TypeScript definitions, and there is a lot of other things. If you are interested, go on our GitHub, and there is a link to a release notes for 3.0. There is a lot of changes. Many of these are just simple improvements, but there are few large features. So let's see the first one, the JS directive. One of the very frequent feedback we were getting was, okay, I like .vvm, it helps me with a lot of things, but I also want to use some third-party JavaScript control. How do I integrate these two together so I can still use .vvm, but I can pass some values from the view model to the JavaScript code, and also if something happens in the control, I want to integrate it back to .vvm. So that was the feedback we are getting from our internal teams that are using .vvm on real projects, also from our customers. So basically, JS directives allows you to import a JavaScript module in the page and communicate between JavaScript and .vvm part in both ways. Yeah, so you can, for example, you can change the view model from the client side. There is a JavaScript API you can use to manipulate with things with the view model. You can also call any custom API. It's also a very frequent scenario. Or you just want to use some third-party library or control. So the first thing you need to do is to import this JS module by using the @JS directive at the top of the page. That's what gave the name to this feature. And once you do it, you will be able to interact between those two parts. So first part, if you, for example, have a button and want to call some JavaScript function from it, and it doesn't need to be a button, because for button you can just use button on click equals and some piece of JavaScript. But if you want to pass some values from the view model to this JavaScript function, it's then not so easy, so this still helps. But also you can respond to, I don't know, selection changed on the combo box you have seen in the previous demos and things like that. So whenever you can write a command in .vvm, you can call functions from your JS imported module. So basically there is a new function called JS invoke, and here there is a function name in JavaScript. Unfortunately there is no IntelliSense because it's very difficult to understand what will actually be present in the JavaScript object when the module is loaded. So you need to pass the function name as a string, and of course you can make a typo here. And then you can pass any number of parameters to the function, and these are just expressions from your view model. So I'm just taking here latitude and longitude and send it to the function. And in the JavaScript file, you need to do two things. First is to provide a factory for the module, which is basically this export default function. This is a function, it's a lambda. .vvm will pass the context variable, which is object, you will see later, and the function needs to return a new instance of the module. So I'm creating new dashboard module instance, and in this class I'm just backing up the context, so I have it available there. And then in this object you can define functions. So here's my add marker function, which gets two parameters, latitude, longitude, as same as here, and you can do anything with these values. Yeah, so I'm initializing a marker on Google Maps, for example. So that's the way from .vvm to JavaScript. You have some .vvm UI control and you want to call JavaScript. So this is how you can do it. And sometimes you need to do opposite thing. For example, if the user clicks on the marker in the map, you need to notify .vvm, okay, something has changed, do something in the view model or send something to the server. Yeah, so you need to do some kind of action based on a JavaScript event. So basically, in your event handler, you can do this. You can use the context object that was passed to the module. You can use it, and there is the named commands collection or named commands object, which contains any functions that you will expose like this. So I'm using the named command control in .vvm. Yeah, you need to specify the name and you need to specify the command. So here you will specify, okay, it's a command, I will be calling a function on the server, and you can pass parameters. That's because we support lambdas in command bindings, you can pass parameters to these commands. So you will say, okay, I need one parameter of type integer and I'm calling this function in my view model. You can also use a static command here, so you don't need to just do a full post back to the server. You can just do any other thing. It's just a command. And so I'm calling this function and I'm passing marker ID to this ID parameter. Yeah, so you just need to make sure that you are passing the correct types and correct numbers of arguments. There is no checks on the compile time. You will see in the runtime if you have done it wrong. But if the name matches and the parameters match, then this will be called. Yeah? And also it returns a promise. So if, for example, the user went offline and this call was unsuccessful, you will get a JavaScript error and you can, for example, show some error message or something like that. Yeah? So you also are aware of whether and when the command actually succeeded or failed and how long it take. Yeah, so and because we are using modern JavaScript, this feature is not supported in old Internet Explorer. You can also use new syntax features in JavaScript like async await. So this function is async, and because this is promise, I can await it. Yeah, that's also a very nice thing. Okay, the JS directive, there is a few more notes to this feature. Definitely check it out and try it. You can have multiple modules registered per page or per master page or per markup control. Basically everything which you can write in the OTA HTML syntax. In all these files you can import your JS module, but be careful, this module is accessible only from the markup where it's registered. Yeah, so if you, for example, use the module in a markup control, and then you use this same markup control twice on a page, there will be actually two instances of the module object. Yeah, so if you store something in one of them, the second will not see it because it's scoped to the instance of the markup file. Yeah, so but it also helps you to make things universal, because actually if you want to create independent control which would work everywhere, it's quite useful that it has its own scope and nobody else can tamper with its scope. Yeah, so be careful that there can actually exist multiple instances of the modules. For example, if you are using single page apps and you import some module in the master page, its instance will be alive for the entire time the user is in the application, because parts of the master page are still in the browser. So while the markup is still present in the browser, then also the module exists. Basically, the module is destroyed once its related piece of markup disappears from the browser. Yeah. So and the module has to have the default export, and it's a function that will get the context parameter, and it needs to return the instance of the module. And it must be ECMAScript module. Yeah, so it must use the native export import syntax presented in ES6. So that's the reason why it's not supported on Internet Explorer 11, because IE 11 doesn't support ES modules. Also, be careful if you are using Webpack. Webpack can consume ES modules, but it cannot produce output in the ES modules syntax. So you will be able to take these modules and bundle them together, but what the Webpack spits out is not compatible with .vvm module loader. That's what we are planning to improve in the next versions, but right now if you are using Webpack, it's not possible to bundle these modules through Webpack, so you need to exclude them from the Webpack workflow or use some other module bundler, for example Rollup. It works very well and we are using it everywhere. Okay, let's look at the demo of JS modules. And here we have a sample application. It has multiple versions. The same project is here in also in a Rollup variant, and also in the Webpack, which, as I said, it doesn't work, but it's prepared because once we introduce support for Webpack, it will just start working once we upgrade .vvm. So, but right now it's not working. And basically, I have let me run the application first. So no, it's not this one. It's the other one. Okay, please die. Okay. Now they are both running on the same port, unfortunately, because it's the default port of ASP.NET Core. So that's one. The previous demo was blocking the port for the current demo, so that's why I need to kill the console app. Okay, this is my demo, and if you look carefully, you can see that these markers are moving because I'm using SignalR in the application, and the server updates the positions of the pizza couriers across the entire country. Yeah, so that's it. And there are some interactions with the map. So if I click on a marker, you can see that this UI on the right side has changed. I can send messages to the couriers. When I send message, you will see that there is a notification, for example, and I can go back, and I can also select a courier from this list. So if I want to write something to courier number 2, I can just click on the name, and you can see also the marker change the color. So basically the interaction works in both ways. So how to create this experience? Okay, so here is my application. Basically there are a few building blocks. First is that I have this JavaScript file, which is my module, and as you can see there is a default function. So I'm exporting default function, which gets the context parameter and returns a new object. I need to register this file in .vvm startup. So here in the configure resources, here is a registration of my dashboard module. So you can see I'm registering, and now be careful, it's not a script resource, but it's script module resource because you need to insert type equals module in the generated script element. Yeah, jQuery and SignalR and all these libraries, there are just normal scripts that run from the top to bottom, but this is a script module. Yeah, so you need to use different resource type. Otherwise, the rest is the same. Just be careful not to use script resource, but script module resource. And I'm passing the URL, and also thanks to this you can use the dependencies. So I'm telling .vvm, okay, import this module, but after you import the Google Maps and SignalR, because these are required by the module, so the module can declare its dependencies. And I'm registering Google Maps and SignalR above that, so you can see I'm just using the libraries Google Maps from CDN, and this SignalR is embedded in my application in the lib folder. Yeah? And I'm then requesting this dashboard module resource, and it will also include all the dependencies which this module actually needs. Yeah, so this is how I import the module in the page. And now I have a list of couriers. It's the right section of my demo. So when I get here, it's this section, yeah, list of couriers. So this is just a repeater over the couriers collection. And here I have a link button which has a static command associated to the click event, and it does two things. First, in the view model, it sets the selected courier to the actual item from the collection. So I will have the property selected courier set up. And then I'm invoking a JavaScript function in the module called highlight courier and passing the ID of the courier. This will make the marker red. Yeah, so you can see I'm just zoom out so all of them are visible. And if I click on something, yeah, so I have selected the courier and called the highlight courier function. So this one is red right now. Okay, so if I go to the module, you can see this is the app class, this is the constructor, some kind of initialization. And if I go here, there is a highlight courier function, and I'm just iterating through the list of markers and resetting the colors. So if the ID is what I requested, then the color will be red, otherwise it will be black. Yeah? And in the constructor, I'm initializing the map. So I'm looking for a div element in the page with the ID equals map. And I'm initializing the map in the page. I'm also initializing the SignalR connection and preparing an array of all the markers. And basically that's it. And there is the integration, communication in the other side. So when I get using SignalR, when I get the new positions from the server, yeah, the SignalR is configured here. I'm just connecting to the SignalR hub on the server. And if I get the new positions message, then I will be calling this on new positions function. And basically, I'm going through the list of markers. If the marker is not created, I'm creating it. Yeah, so it will create a marker on this position with the black icon. And it's adding a listener. So once I click on the marker, I will be calling a function in the .vvm page called select courier and passing the ID of the courier. Yeah. So this is the otherwise from JavaScript to the page. And I want to perform some action, so I need to look for the named command, select courier, and you can see the command is right here. I'm passing the ID of the courier, and I am assigning the end courier to the selected courier property in the view model. Yeah, so I'm doing basically the same thing the button was doing previously, but this can be called from JavaScript. Yeah, so that's how you call JavaScript from .vvm and .vvm from JavaScript. And of course, it can be a server command. This is just a local manipulation with the view model, which I would also be able to do it from JavaScript, by the way. But still, you can use the classic command and send the page to the server and do any kind of processing. So that's up to your decision what expression you will have here. Okay, so that's it. And let's continue. So the JS directive helps you to integrate third-party libraries, for example, like Google Maps you have seen, or anything, or SignalR, or anything else. You can just import the module and the page and call it from in both directions, basically. Okay. There are other things that we have introduced in .vvm 3.0. One of them is new syntax in binding expressions, because we basically .vvm parses what you write into the command or static command binding and tries to evaluate it or translate to JavaScript in static commands. So basically, if some new features appear in the C# language, it doesn't mean that you can use them in the bindings, because the syntax of binding is very heavily inspired by C#, but it's not 100% compatible with it. Yeah, we wish it would be a subset. Unfortunately, there are some things we support and C# doesn't support, like comparing strings to enums, but these are just tiny exceptions, I would say. Yeah, so it's not. We have added new syntax elements to the bindings. So, for example, you will be able to use lambdas, you will be able to use string interpolation, and a lot of other things. It's important to understand the difference between the command and static command binding. In case of command binding, it's always evaluated on the server. So when you click on a button, which has a command binding associated, it will just send the view model to the server, and everything that's inside of the command binding will be executed on the server. Yeah? So, which means that you can call any function. The IntelliSense won't offer you everything, but basically you can call anything because it's running on the server side. Yeah? In case of static command, it's not that case, because a static command is translated to JavaScript. So for example, you can use it to just client-only manipulation with the view model. It won't call the server at all, because it can assign property plus one to a property. Yeah, .vvm will just translate this to JavaScript. Also, you can call server methods from the client side, but you will just only passing parameters to them, and you can then work with the result. So you can call a function in your static command service, and you can pass parameters and then interact with the result. So assign the result to some property. But this is not sending the entire view model. This is just sending the parameters of the function to the server and obtaining only the result, not the entire view model. So this is much more efficient. And so the bindings support a lot of new features. First, for example, is the variable declaration. It's very useful if the function needs to return multiple values. For example, if you want to return some kind of collection, give me the first page of this very long list, but also give me a total number of records. So you need to return a collection and an object. So that's where you can use variables, because the function can just return an object with two properties, and you can just then take the properties and assign them to different places in your view model. Yeah, so it's quite easy. There are lambda support in data bindings, which is very important. It's very useful for the named commands, because you need to call a function in the .vvm scope and pass parameters to that. So that's why you can use lambdas in a named command. And also it's very interesting and important because we wanted to allow using link methods in the data bindings in the static commands. So that's why we added the support for lambdas and also support for extension methods. Yeah, so now you can call extension methods in your data bindings. And thanks to these two features, we can support a lot of link functions. There is also string interpolation, which is the new syntax of string with the $ in front of it. So you can then substitute values and use expressions inside the string, and they are evaluated and everything is composed together. So You can use this in the data bindings too, and we support a lot of JavaScript translations, so functions which you weren't able to use in static commands before because .vvm couldn't translate them to their JavaScript equivalents. Now it will be able to translate them. So there is a lot of operations on lists. You can add things to lists on the client side. There is support for dictionary, so you can read or update dictionary entries, and you can use math and string functions also. So it's quite useful. You will hear a lot of more details in one of the next sessions where my colleague Andrei will be talking about most of these improvements in data bindings are actually his work. So he will share all the details that you can use right now. Okay, there is another important feature, especially useful if you are writing a lot of JavaScript, because now .vvm has changed the way how it works with the state on the client. If you are on the server, it's very easy because .vvm just create an instance of your view model, and it's just a C# object in memory, nothing really complicated. But then .vvm takes this object and sends it to the client together with the page HTML, and the object is serialized in JSON. And then .vvm will deserialize it and make it a JavaScript object on the client side, so the controls can interact with the view model. Yeah? And in previous versions, we were using Knockout.js. We are still using Knockout.js, but we are using representing the state differently, because in previous versions, the state was represented as a hierarchy of Knockout observable objects. Knockout has a special object called observable, which can, it's something like property in .NET. If you know something like the iNotify property change, it's pretty much the same concept. Yeah, so observable is an object which can get or set the value, and if you set the value, it can notify everyone who actually depends on this value. Yeah, which is important to implement the MVVM experience. And from .vvm 3.0, we store the state in a different object. It's our pure plain JS object, and it's immutable. So if you change anything in the state, we are not modifying the existing state object, but we are creating a new immutable copy of the state. Yeah? So this prevents a lot of problems, a lot of issues. And also because of .vvm is still using Knockout.js, so we basically emulate the hierarchy of Knockout observables, but they store the values in this JavaScript object. And there is also a new API to manipulate with the view models. So you can use it. It's much simpler than it was before. And also all operations on the view model are validated because .vvm now includes a type information within the view model. So the view model knows that this property is an integer, and then you can only assign to it the numbers, not strings, not arrays, not any other objects. Yeah? And if you try to do it on the client, you will get an exception. So let's see a demo. I will open any website that is actually called that is actually implemented in .vvm 3.0. For example, our documentation. And if I go to the console and remove all the clutter, then previously, if you wanted to get working with .vvm view model on the client side from JavaScript, you would need to do something like the .vvm.viewmodels root view model, and it will return an object. And you need to for example, know what's inside of this object. So for example, I have a search text here. Yeah. So for example, .viewModel.search text, and it's a knockout observable. So it's not a string, it's a knockout observable. Basically, it tells you it's a function. And if you call it without parameters, it means get. So it will return the search text. I don't have anything in the search box right now, so let's say hello.vvm, and if I evaluate the same expression here right now, you can see there is hello.vvm. Yeah, so it's getting the value. If you want to set a value, you will pass a parameter, so test, for example, and if I set it and look here, you can see that this has changed. So it's two-way data binding as we are used to it in a model view model. But of course, this API is quite long, it's not very comfortable, and if you have a hierarchies in the view model, it's quite difficult to get there, to get everywhere where you want, because if you want to go, for example, to the... Do we have a menu here or something like that? There is, for example, current page, which probably will be some object. So let's try it. For example, there is the current page. Okay, it's null. It's not very nice. For example, the suggestion form. Yeah, there is a form you can use in if you want to give us feedback. So it's and if I evaluate it, it's just an object with another things. But if I want to, for example, read the email, I then need to, and also I need to evaluate. So I will need to have these braces everywhere. Yeah, so it's not very convenient for real work. So that's why we have a new API in .vvm 3.0. This old, of course, works the same way as it worked before, but we now have .vvm.state, which will return not the knockout observables, but it will return a pure JavaScript object. So you can see it's listed here pretty nicely, and you can see we have you can see the values right away. You don't need to invoke any functions. It's even not possible. And if you want to go to collections or anything like that, you can just you can see everything here. And there is a way to modify. That's what I forgot to mention. If you try to modify something, it's a little bit tricky, because if I say, I don't know, changed value, it will do nothing. Yeah, it will return the changed value. If you look in the page, there is still test. Yeah, because the state is immutable. And also, this is a little annoying, but we are in the JavaScript world. If you evaluate the search text again, it's still test. That's because once we are returning the .vvm.state, the object is frozen. JavaScript has a nice function object.freeze, which does exactly like that. So any attempts to modify the object will be basically revoked. So the object is not possible to change. Yeah? And this is quite important, because we don't want anyone to tamper with the state. So even if you try to set something there, it won't work, it won't do anything. So you are not able to destroy the state for the .vvm page. You can still try to destroy it through the knockout observables, but since we are now validating the view model, at least for the type information, it's not so easy. I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's definitely not easy. Okay, and the important thing is there is a function called patch state, which you can use to patch the view model. So you don't need to, you need to set pass there an object, and you can say change search text to changed value using patch. Yeah. So now I'm sending this patch object to the view model, and if you do it, you can see it's applied. Yeah, so .vvm.state is to read the state, but don't try to modify the results. It won't do anything. And if you want to manipulate with the view model, you can use this patch state API. You can also combine these two approaches, because you can, for example, use .vvm.viewmodels root view model search text, and there is also a state property, and there is also patch state, but it's a string, so the patch state will probably, but it should work like this, hopefully. Yeah, it works like this, but because it's a string, you cannot pass an object here. If you if you try to pass something unsupported to the search text, yeah, because it's a string, so you can set null there, because null is a legitimate value in the string. But if you, for example, try to set an array there, 1, 2, 3, then you will get an error, because .vvm won't allow you to set incorrect values in the properties. Yeah, so that's what you can see. And if you were writing some JavaScript previously, you might start to get these errors because sometimes we rather prevent setting incorrect values in the view model, because in previous versions you could do that and it would probably break on some other part of the UI. So we decided to make a breaking change here because we think it's safer in the long term, because if you set something where in the view model where .vvm doesn't know about this value or doesn't know how to handle it, it can create unpredictable issues later at a later time in the page. So that's why we introduced this validation. Okay, so this is the new API for manipulation with the view models. It's also nice. And final slides about other improvements. We have rewritten the JavaScript part of .vvm, which is quite huge, into new TypeScript using ECMAScript modules, and we are using rollup for bundling. And currently the .vvm framework includes two versions of JavaScript, one for old browsers like IE11 and one for modern browsers, which is using the modules and the latest improvements in JavaScript. We have also refactored the postback pipeline. We fixed a lot of bugs. So in previous versions, if you made a lot of concurrent postbacks, you might run into weird situations, like one of our colleagues, for example, who was triggering postbacks from SignalR, and there was a lot of communication over the SignalR channel. So he was creating a lot of postbacks and static commands at the same time. So there were a lot of collisions, and he found a lot of problems here. Right now in .vvm 3.0, we have also created a stress test which checked if we haven't forgot to deal with some situation. It seems like it's stable now, so that's a good news. And also, if you have been subscribing to some .vvm events, like .vvm.events init subscribe, then these events now get more information. Sometimes there were some problems like that you subscribed to, I don't know, after postback, but there wasn't all the information in the event you actually needed to perform the action. So now there are more parameters. We had to remove some of them. So see the release note, there is a list of all breaking changes in this API, but in general it should more help than do more help than harm, because we mostly added more information. And there were two modes how to use single page applications. One was using the history API, which is support in modern browsers. And by modern browser now I also mean IE11, which also supports history API. This it wasn't supported, I think, in IE9 or something like that, but we don't support IE9 anymore. And so now the history API is the only option. So there are some properties missing on SPA content placeholder because they are not needed. We are using the history API for all SPAs. So you might get some warnings like you are using obsolete API. These properties are still there, but they are not doing anything because they're just ignored. Also for IE9, which we supported in the first versions of .vvm and which we don't support, and I hope that nobody is supporting IE9 today, we were using iframes inside the file upload component. Even in IE11 it's not necessary, so now we have cleaned up the file upload, so it's not using iframe. This will be from .vvm 3.1. In 3.0 it's still using iframe, but it will disappear. Otherwise the control behaves as the same way as before, so you shouldn't notice anything, but the hidden iframe is not there. So if you have some nasty proxy server that tries to block iframes or something like that, there's one less issue you might run into. Also, we have implemented support for aborting long-running commands and static commands from the client. So for example, if you have a long-term operation and you are calling it through command or static command, and then start another command and they both cannot run together, so .vvm will abort the request. And if you are correctly using cancellation tokens on the server, it can also abort the asynchronous operation. So if you are using async await with cancellation tokens, and you can now take advantage of this, because if it's a long request that is wasting a lot of server resources and it ends prematurely, then also the request will be cancelled on the server, which is quite nice. And we have done a lot of, and this is more internal feature, we have refactored and redesigned the .vvm command line interface, which is important for us to provide more stable and more powerful IntelliSense in Visual Studio. It's not being used by the Visual Studio extension right now, but we are preparing the infrastructure so we can take advantage of it, and the Visual Studio, the IntelliSense in Visual Studio should be more reliable because of this change. So that's the timeline. We released .vvm 3.0 in March, and the last day of March I think it was, and .vvm 3.1 is almost ready. We have released .vvm 3.1 preview 6, and it should be the last preview before the final version, and it's feature complete. We won't be adding new features in it, but we just are waiting. If there are some bugs, we want to fix them before we really release the 3.1. So but it's been quite stable. We are using it on our projects, so feel free to use it. Once we release the final version, it shouldn't be a very big change, because we think that there maybe nothing will change between these two releases, that maybe 1 or 2 commits for some tiny fixes, but nothing really important should be changed between these releases. So feel free to upgrade to 3.1 now, because it's almost ready. We don't know if we will be ever releasing 3.2 or 4.0, because we have a lot of features planned for 4.0, but a lot of them are actually almost ready, almost implemented. They are now in the review stage, so it's possible that we will be releasing .vvm 4.0 pretty early. I hope that it will be this year, maybe on the autumn or early winter. We will see. But in total, I think that one of the biggest features we plan for .vvm 4.0, it's almost ready, and we are now looking for other features we want to squeeze in. But if we have enough features that we think that it's a good idea to release a major version, so we will do it. So you can expect .vvm 4.0 pretty early. So that's about the news in .vvm 3.0 and 3.1. And now, after the break, my colleague Michael will tell you something about how to use AMP in combination with .vvm. So see you in a few minutes.